Welcome to another episode of Well, Don't Tell the Kids. I'm Janet Lee, your host, and today I'm very happy to be speaking with my guest, Jennifer Weaver. Thank you very much for joining me today, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
Jennifer studied psychology and is a licensed clinical social worker. Maybe you could unpack your educational path and let us know why you went into this field?
Sure. Well, it was in a very unintentional route. I went to Virginia Tech for college, and I was a Russian spy.
Huh.
That was my whole life plan. I thought that was a really brilliant idea. I think just a fun thing to tell if they asked me what I was going to do with my life. But it turns out I was terrible at Russian, just terrible. And then I didn't know what I wanted to do for quite a while in college, and floundered about and played in a rock band and took some time off and blah, blah, blah. And then one day counted up all my credits and realized I had more psychology credits than anything else, or at least passing credits. Mm-hmm. So I got a psychology degree, and then I worked doing counseling kinds of work in a couple of different capacities after college for a couple of years, including at a women's health clinic in the area, and decided to go back and get my master's. So I have a master's in social work from Catholic University. And then after you get your master's in that, you have to do a couple of years, kind of like a residency, the way a doctor would do a residency before you're fully licensed.
Was the residency in a specific concentration? Yeah, I guess the surveys, put it.
Yeah, like an overview. It was in a concentration. My specialty in school, in my master's program, was child and adolescent work. I wanted to focus more on adolescents until I started working with younger children also. But then when I started doing some of my internships in school and then the residency kinds of programs out of school also had a large child component. And I had thought that would be not very intellectually stimulating compared to working with adolescents, that it would feel a little more, be a little more simple or easy or whatever. But actually I find working with younger children actually pretty complex and intellectually stimulating, just like working with adolescents and young adults. So that was my focus, and that's always been my specialty, is child and adolescent work.
Yeah, I suppose when the younger they are, obviously the modes of communication are different.
Yeah, exactly. It's complicated in a different way.
We live in an anxious time, and one could argue getting more and more anxious because of many components in our personal lives and in society. But can you speak to the rise of anxiety in the childhood population that you studied or have had experience with?
When I actually feel like over the course of the past 20 years, I have seen a rise in anxiety being a dominant problem in child and adolescent populations. When I was first working with those age groups, early on in my career, certainly there was a lot of anxiety, but there was more focus on trauma and maybe children trying to manage if there's difficult family or divorce, those, and a lot of depression, I would say, with the adolescent population, and also behavior problems. But over the course of my career, I feel that, this is just anecdotal, but I think it fits with the evidence statistics coming out, which is that there really is an increase in anxiety among children and adolescents, especially, I would say, over the past 15 years. That's a real, there's been a real shift in that being a dominant problem, and that with anxiety there become a lot of other problems that sort of, sometimes kids come in or families bring kids in for one problem, but the underlying issue turns out to be anxiety. It doesn't always look like anxiety. I also teach at Catholic University. I've been there for the past, since the past 18 years, on and off. And those are the classes that I teach, are clinical work, helping master's students learn clinical work with, how to do clinical work with children and adolescents and young adults. That's sort of the three areas. And I would say that within the student population at the university, there's been an increase in interest, questions, concerns around anxiety too. So the sort of newer therapists that are just new on the ground are also constantly working with that problem. So I sort of see it two ways.
Now, you mentioned 15 years. Have you localized the cause?
No, I don't think anybody, we could speculate about a lot of things. We could look at 9/11 or we certainly see that anxiety is actually worse in some ways, depending on how it's measured and how it's defined, is actually worse in higher socioeconomic populations than lower socioeconomic populations. And we could certainly extrapolate from there and wonder why that might be. I think there's a lot of very intelligent people who've made a lot of intelligent guesses and, probably well-informed guesses, but that's really all that they are. We could certainly talk. The increased heightened communication, the sort of instant media pieces that I think can be very anxiety-producing to all of us. And, sort of just our 24-hour constant news world. There's a tenor, I think, in the United States, probably, and a number of other countries too, where everywhere you go, the news is on, there's a ticker underneath, there's, it always feels like there's a breaking news. It always feels like, it gives you a sort of a sense of anxiety that stuff's going on all the time that's dangerous. And our minds are built for that. So here, you asked if everybody knew the cause, and I would say no, but I certainly tell you my guesses. And one of my guesses is that contributes. Not that that's the whole ball of wax, but that our minds are built to read our landscape for acute danger, and our fight or flight systems turn on. And then when the danger is over, our fight or flight systems turn off, and we go about our life and and we don't get a lot of, the acute danger is somewhat rare, right? The tiger comes into the village or something. And when we are exposed to the amount of 24/7 news cycles, if you see that, for example, a child has been kidnapped in Oregon on the news, you can intellectually know, oh, well, that's not here. But your brain doesn't, your more primitive part of your brain, your fight or flight system, doesn't know what to do with that information other than, oh, there's danger. It's dangerous to be a child. People get kidnapped. So lots of times we see kids and adolescents coming in, and a lot of their fears are related to a lot of stuff that I think just sort of permeate our worlds through the news and even on the radio. You can get in the car and the radio turns on, and they're accidentally exposed, as are adults. I think parents are much, much more anxious than they used to be, too. And I think that there's a real contagion around the anxiety also. Parents are also exposed to the dangers of children being hurt or kidnapped or die in swimming pools. All those things do happen. They're extremely rare. But our brains don't read it that. Our brains don't know the difference between that happening statistically. Our primitive brains don't realize the difference between having statistically very rare versus, oh, her name was Sasha. The details feel very personal. It feels like it just happened right there in your village. And I think it skews our perspective.
I think that you've done work on maybe the solution side of things, so I wanted to just see if you could highlight some work maybe with mindfulness, and also there's something that was intriguing to me, developing empathic listening, and I wonder what that is exactly. And it sounds like to me that these may be antidotes or things that can counter anxiety.
Yes, or possibly put the anxiety into perspective. And yeah, I think those two techniques are related to one another. So to talk about the empathic listening first, actually, and then we'll come back to the mindfulness, if that's okay. Sure. Say I'm working with a small child who has a lot of anxiety, and I'm doing a kind of play therapy, because for children, young children, words are a less effective way of getting at feelings than than more play style of communication. Kids can go deeper and access more if they're playing. And I don't mean the playing as a distraction. I mean the playing is actually a language in which to communicate their fears and concerns and feelings, and then the therapist can communicate back through the play. And we find that tends to be a deeper sort of way of talking with kids. Because as you know, as adults, when we talk about feelings, it's very difficult, and certainly little children just don't have the capacity or the ability to think abstractly that way through language, but they can through play. So if they're playing and they play about some feelings, so say you have an anxious child and the anxious child is playing a story about, they might have like some figures, like some Playmobil figures where there's children and parents, and then a dragon comes and breathes fire in all their houses, or, so there's some little storyline. The children generate the storylines. The therapist can say, as this is happening, oh my gosh, it's so scary when the dragon comes. The children are so scared. The parents are scared too. No one knows what to do. This is so hard. Giving a lot of language to the play. And we believe that even though that sounds sort of alarming, you would do that to a child, that in fact that's actually very soothing to them, because what you're doing is you're naming the feelings that they're bringing up, and you are providing words and language to that actually soothes the nervous system rather than riles it up. It says, I understand you, those are real feelings, and we know what the names of those feelings are. And so if you extrapolate that then further in just real life, if a child is having feelings about, well, it doesn't even have to be a worried feeling. It could be a desire or something. So, for example, when my kids were really little, when we would drive around the area or, go home from preschool or whatever, we used to live in Arlington, and we would pass the McDonald's, and my kids would be like, McDonald's, oh my gosh, McDonald's. They really wanted to go to McDonald's. And so they were having feelings about that, right? Logical parent response, if you're not going to McDonald's, is, oh, we're not going to McDonald's today, I'm sorry. And you might even be like, McDonald's isn't very good for you. We're going to go home and we're going to have a balanced meal. I don't know, whatever you might say. But if you wanted to give some empathic listening to that, obviously, but if you wanted to provide empathic listening for those feelings, you could instead say, oh, McDonald's, I can smell the fries from here. It smells so good. McDonald's would taste so good. We're not going to be able to eat at McDonald's today. We're going home, but I could see why everybody'd really want to go to McDonald's. And what that's doing is it's validating the feeling that as a perfectly reasonable thing when you drive past and smell that smell. I don't know. One of my kids hates McDonald's, so he'd be annoyed at the story, but and doesn't like the smell. But that it would feel good for someone to say, no, even though we're not going to McDonald's, I totally get that's your feeling. That's your feeling. What are you going to do? And naming that feeling, kids tend to argue less if you say, oh, I could really see where you'd want to go, then if you're like, no, that's enough. And then then they're more likely to argue then because they don't feel validated. And so it's almost a paradoxical experience for the child where if you agree that their feeling state is valid, even though you're not going, half of what they wanted is to just be understood. You know what I mean? And so if you say, I totally get you, you're not weird, you're not wrong, you're not a bad kid for wanting to go to McDonald's, but we're not going. I totally get where you're coming from. That tends to be very soothing to the nervous system. So doing that for worry is helpful too. If a kid, so before a kid might go to a birthday party, if they're very sensory sensitive, and they're lots of kids are afraid of birthday parties. And lots of parents will say, that's crazy, this is going to be so fun, you're going to have such a great time, Joey. And they're sort of trying to talk them out of the feeling because they're trying to be supportive, not because they're mean parents, they're awesome parents, but they're just trying to be supportive, give them a little perspective. But paradoxically, if the parent were to instead say, we're going to Joey's birthday party, and and it's going to be fun, but it also could be really loud, and you don't always like it when it's loud, and there could be a lot of kids. And sometimes at first when you go, you feel a little stressed when you see a lot of kids. If you name the feelings even before they happen, rather than making the child more upset, that generally calms the child down. They're like, yes, I do like birthday parties, and I don't like it when it's too loud. And when there's a lot of kids, I do get really stressed. That gives them, it allows, it keeps the fight or flight system from hijacking the prefrontal cortex. It keeps that worry system from hijacking their higher order stuff. You've named it already, and we have a saying in the business, which is name it to tame it. Name the feeling actually tames the feeling. There's actually really good neurobiological evidence that this is neurobiologically effective. It helps wire up lower and higher orders of the brain. Language allows that wiring to occur. So it's also brain building when you do that. Empathic listening. Naming their feeling helps them wire in, oh, that feeling, that's called this. That's something you can tolerate. That's hard, but you can tolerate it.
Yeah, I think half of it is that parents are so frazzled. That takes some effort and time on the parents' part, too. Where it's easier to be like forget it.
It's against every bone in their body. Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah,
and I think if you
practice, go to the birthday party. Don't be weird.
Right. Or you just practice it at, I don't know. Yeah, that's the fine art of parenting, I suppose. We always can use some help and
fine tuning.
That we know we have parent groups and other people who can help and have validation on our own part. When we're in groups.
So.
It's true. The parents need to be validated too. It's so frustrating when your child's the only child who refuses to walk into the birthday party. It feels embarrassing. That would be empathic listening as well.
Mindfulness has become more, the profile of the word or the ideas has risen, but I'm just wondering what you found in your practice.
Yeah, so I think what I'm describing actually within the land of empathic listening is a kind of mindfulness. There's tremendous evidence that knowing, if I were going to describe the three elements of true mental health for most human beings, I would say, and this is based on neurobiological studies at Siegel and others at Stanford and UCLA, and that you are going to be an effective, well-functioning human being in a variety of basic ways. Like you can hold a job, relationships, lack of substance abuse, you're functioning well, is if you know how you feel and you can say it in words. So that's one thing, right? You can say, oh, I'm really frustrated with my boss right now. Maybe you don't say it to your boss, but you say it to yourself. I know how I feel and I can use a word in my mind for it. And if you're non-judgmental about the feeling, so you don't get all tied up in it and say, why do I always have to feel this way? Why do I have to get so frustrated? You're just you get a little surfer, right? This is the mindfulness, the sort of Buddha piece, the Eastern philosophy piece, which is, yes, that happens. There's no judgment there. It's just interesting to notice. And then you're non-reactive. So saying how you feel in words, being non-judgmental about the feeling and accepting instead, and being non-reactive. You don't have to do anything about the fact that you're frustrated with your boss. You're just like, yep, what are you going to do? That is actually a really good constellation of that. That's a kind of mindfulness. You know how you feel. You don't avoid it. You can name it. You accept it. You tolerate it. And you move forward. And you don't necessarily have to do anything to fix it. I would say if there's one issue that we have in this area that's a huge impact, is that a lot of parents are very good at naming kids' feelings and sort of accepting them. Oh, yes, say John hit Beth, right, at the playground, and Beth's crying. And you say, oh, Beth, that's so sad, when someone hits you, I think a lot of parents are very good at naming feelings. You're sad, you're mad, whatever. But some parents, I think, very effective, wonderful parents, then look to try to fix the feeling. Mindfulness is about not fixing the feeling. It's about accepting it and doing nothing about it. And that's the part that I feel like the kids that we see in our practice here in McLean and the kids that my students see are less good at. Often they think it should be fixed. I'm uncomfortable, so do something, or I'm going to do something. In fact, it's just uncomfortable to be alive. That's the mindfulness part, right? Mindfulness isn't relaxing. Mindfulness is knowing how you feel, even if it's really uncomfortable, and sitting with it. So that toleration of affect, to me, is the most important part of the mindfulness movement in terms of people being able to manage well and be effective.
Do you have a simple entry point for this mindfulness that you would share with us? Like, because that's great. That sounds really great. But you know what? Again, like.
Yeah, it's really difficult when you're awash.
Really, that doesn't sound so easy, Janet. Well, just Exactly. Yes, it all sounds awesome. And I could talk about it all day long and still, drive home and during my commute, get really riled up because that's what our brains do. The gold standard for developing mindfulness is some kind of meditation practice. So and there's evidence to show that even 5 or 10 minutes a day, as long as it's a consistent practice, is actually very effective in helping people develop mindfulness. And it's kind of like going to the gym for your mind. So like if you wanted to get in shape physically, you could go, you could start, you could go to the gym every day and lift weights or whatever, or you could just be more active and walk the dog more or whatever. Going to the gym is probably the most effective, fastest, but maybe not the most fun. The same is true for meditation. If you meditate every day, even for a short period of time, there's more and more evidence to show. And in fact, there was just a new article in the New York Times this past weekend on that, about there really is tremendous effectiveness even with short periods, because it's like lifting weights for your mind. Your mind practices every day for 5 or 10 minutes this ability to name and tolerate feeling while sitting and doing nothing. And weirdly, that practice every day builds that ability, that strength, so that when you're in a bad situation in real life, like in traffic or someone cuts you off, you've already practiced this approach, and your brain is strong and wired and synaptically wired to be more likely name the feeling and just tolerate it without honking your horn or banging your hand on the steering wheel. So that's the gold standard, but you can do it a million ways. You can also there's lots of books about 2 mindful minutes, or you can mindfully walk or brush your teeth. You can mindfully brush your teeth. You can mindfully wash the dishes. It's all about just taking a couple of minutes, being very present, slowing things down. Most people do something with their breath in order to sort of provide an anchor. And they just notice that their feelings come and go.
Like clouds.
Yes, you put them in a little cloud. Yeah. I really like the Calm app, and I really like the Headspace app. Right. Headspace is one of my favorites. They have tons of great videos that you could go on their website, and in 3 minutes you can see a little cartoon that explains more about mindfulness than, pictures worth 1,000 words.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that you are working with that, and especially with the young, because a vulnerable class. And
the younger we can work with people, and in our practice work, so we say 2 to 22. That's really sort of when the brain is the most growth is happening and the most plasticity is occurring. Then that's such a gift for your kids for the rest of their lives. If I started meditating, at 40 or whatever, or start trying to do some mindfulness things, then it's harder for me. I don't have that already wired in. But if you work with somebody who's 5, or even if you work with somebody who's 20, they can practice these things now, and it's easy. It becomes automatic pilot for them in some ways. So it's exciting to be able to feel like you can give some. It's kind of a gift forever. Yeah,
brain
and
just,
wiring it in, neurobiologically so that it's a smoother system.
Well, I'd like to say that not only is Jennifer an licensed in psychology, but also is a registered play therapist supervisor. So it's something that you have or training in, and a professor, an adjunct professor at Catholic.
Yes.
And,
Yes,
adjunct
and do
professor at
training
Catholic.
for other professionals. Yeah.
Leading
That's the
others.
supervisor bit is, that those residents we were talking about before could get supervision from me. And I do a lot of work with, actually currently my only supervision groups are for adolescents and young adults, for therapists who are working with adolescents and young adults.
Jennifer's group is Weaver and Associates right here in Northern Virginia. Well, I wanted to thank you so much. I first heard you speak at the high school level. You were addressing the panel angst, angst and anxiety.
Yeah, that was such a good movie that they showed through the Safe Community Coalition.
That's right, and I hope that efforts like that continue.
One of the things we're trying to do in the office is kids, anxiety is so contagious. An anxious kid can really increase anxiety in parents, which increases the anxiety in the kids, or vice versa. If the parent's very anxious, it can increase anxiety in the kid. Also, it's a little genetic too. So we're running parent groups now and practice to teach parents with their kids be really empathic and understanding about their worries, but still help them move forward and not get stuck and not avoid. The things we worry about the most is kids who avoid anxiety-producing things, that actually makes things worse. It makes them more anxious. Kids who end up doing the thing that makes them anxious tend to become less anxious over time. So this is one of the only things we feel like we know there's some kind of antidote to when we look at mental health issues. There's a real cure for anxiety in that approach or the doing of the anxious thing truly over time reduces the overall anxiety altogether. So being able to work with parents in a way to help their kids do that without terrifying them or, making it too hard. I don't know, that's sort of our new frontier around here. Kids' lives better because, it's hard to be anxious. It's awesome to be anxious in some ways because anxiety gets you to do your homework, and usually kids who are anxious tend to be pretty socially skilled. They tend to be pretty empathic themselves. They pick up on a lot. So it's really just helping them. Sometimes we say anxiety is your frenemy, It's you need it sometimes. We're not looking for anxiety-less people. It's just you want to be able to be in charge of it rather than it in charge of you.
Thank you once again, Jennifer, for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. It's been really fun.
Thank you all for listening. And once again, my guest has been Jennifer Weaver. I'm Janet Lee. Please stay tuned for more episodes of Well, Don't Tell the Kids.